Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. It's lovely to see people promptly on time. I know that a number of people are still signing in, so I'm just going to give them another minute and then we will start very shortly. Thanks. Okay, thank you for your patience. I'm going to begin the webinar now. We're really delighted to have so many people who've signed up, so welcome. Before I get started, it would be great to know that you can all hear me clearly. So if you wouldn't mind having a look at your webinar panel, your taskbar, and just letting me know that you can hear me by selecting the little hand, which is called raised hand, that should be next to your name. Fantastic. Lovely. Okay, great. I'll just lower them for you now. So let's get started with the webinar about improving biodiversity, opportunities for cultural heritage venues and sites. So first of all, I would just like to say that this is a webinar for within the ROC programme. It's hosted or developed in partnership by Julie's Bicycle and Eurocities. ROC is an EU-funded programme and it stands for the regeneration and optimisation of cultural heritage in creative and knowledge cities. So it's really considering cultural heritage and demonstrating how cultural and historical city centres can become laboratories to test new models of urban regeneration and urban transition. And you can find more information about ROC online by following the hyperlink that I've included. Julie's Bicycle is a charity based in London. That's where I'm from. And we work on the integration of arts and culture and environmental sustainability. Our webinar programme partner, Eurocities, is a network of major European cities founded in 1986 and based in Brussels, and represents more than 140 cities all over Europe. So the two of us, along with 30 other partners across Europe, are part of the ROC EU-funded programme. So I wanted to kick off with just a bit of sort of context setting around culture, heritage and biodiversity. So this is a nice description from the World Heritage Convention that I think makes it clear the interconnectedness between heritage and the natural environment. UNESCO states that although some sites are recognised specifically for their biodiversity values, there are also significant opportunities for reinforcing biodiversity across all heritage properties. So it's not just heritage sites that are recognised as natural heritage sites, but it's also cultural heritage sites that can really benefit from and add value to biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable development. So I've already, before we get stuck into the content, I've already asked you to raise your hands, so I know that you can hear me. The webinar is being recorded, so we can turn it into a resource afterwards for all of those who weren't able to attend, and so that it lives on as a legacy product of the ROC programme. And we will share that file with you when it is made available. You can also see our social media handles if you would like to comment on the webinar. And if you want to ask a question, then you can use the taskbar on the right hand side, and there is a subset for and asking questions. We will be having a Q&A later, so that's when I will be really picking up on anything that you've asked throughout the webinar. And if by accident you exit the webinar and you would like to rejoin, you just simply go back into your emails and reselect the hyperlink, and it should take you straight back in. As I mentioned, I'm also joined by a speaker today, Moya Lloyd from Boundary Way. And my name is Lucy Latham. So Moya will be joining us in the second part of the webinar and be talking about her experiences around engaging topics of nature, culture and creativity. So we'll hear more from her later. She is the project lead at Boundary Way. So why do we care about biodiversity? What is the current context that we're in when it comes to biodiversity, or of course, in the case that we are in, the collapse of biodiversity? So we're seeing that with increasing urbanism, we are becoming more disconnected from nature. And this is just at the moment where nature needs us to notice it most. We are at the start of what is being called the 6th mass extinction in the history of the planet, with the current rate of species extinction thought to be 1,000 times the normal background rate. This is the highest since the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. The Living Planet Index is down 60% since 1970. This was some recent landmark research and media coverage around biodiversity. And in addition, a recent review of studies of insect populations suggests that the global mass of insects has been declining by 2.5% a year for the past 25 to 30 years. So this is also risking a total collapse of insect populations, which we are totally dependent on for our food. In 2016, Kew's State of the World's Plants report estimated that 1 in 5 plant species in the world could be at risk of extinction. So it's not just our fauna, but also our flora. And humans are reliant on the goods and services that nature provides, from bee-assisted crop pollination to water filtration by mollusks, and not forgetting the 3 trillion trees which clean our carbon dioxide out of the air and produce the oxygen we need to breathe. So we are completely dependent on healthy ecosystems for food, materials, clean air and water, and temperature regulation. However, we are simultaneously destroying all of these systems that keep the species supported. In addition, there are sort of further environmental considerations when it comes to biodiversity. Forests have a hugely important role to play in regulating climate change, with, of course, deforestation as a major driver, and afforestation, or the regeneration of forests, as a major opportunity for mitigating climate change. So we're in a very challenging environment, which is requiring us to act with absolute urgency. But what about art and nature? So what we're talking about here is how culture and environment can be mutually supported. And as anyone who works sort of within the creative industries knows, nature has always been a muse for creativity, sparking whole cultural movements in art history, from the Romantic poets to land art, Georgia O'Keeffe to Bjork. Designers and engineers borrow from nature through such um, design initiatives as biomimicry and nature-inspired design. Things like Velcro, whose hook mechanism was inspired by burrs, to bullet trains, which were modelled on kingfishers' beaks to optimize the aerodynamics. So art has shaped science too, from scientific illustrations' role in anatomy and natural history, to the groundbreaking work of artists like Maya Smarek, pushing at the edge of scientific ethics by asking us to reconsider our relationships with non-human species. So our natural heritage is inseparably intertwined with our cultural heritage. UNESCO World Heritage Sites can either be natural or cultural sites. But here, at least in the UK, natural heritage is generally governed separately from cultural heritage. So I think one of the main points of this work and this webinar is clearly to demonstrate the mutually supportive nature and of natural and cultural heritage, and how these need to be managed to be mutually supportive. So what is causing this biodiversity collapse? Well, these are pretty obvious areas that people are probably aware of. The decline in species is driven by a range of often interacting causes, including overconsumption of resources, habitat destruction from deforestation, urbanism, agriculture, and also climate change. Climate change has consequences on the biophysical environment, such as changes in the start and length of the seasons. So it's physically changing our seasons. In addition, glacial retreat, decrease in Arctic sea ice, and sea level rise is all changing where and how and when different species can interact with their changing natural environments. And it's also very much worth noting that climate change is the fastest growing threat to world heritage, according to the IUCN. However, often you don't see climate change and environmental sustainability being explicitly part of cultural heritage strategy and management. So that's something that we're advocating to be changed. So how might these threats to biodiversity in different habitats be linked to arts and cultural activity? Um, so some really obvious ones are around habitat loss and degradation. So what's causing that, which you can see listed there, some examples on the left-hand side, and how this might link to the arts. So thinking about food and catering and procurement choices, what materials are used, how capital development projects are conceived, designed, and implemented. Creation and maintenance of green spaces and places for wildlife within cultural sites and cultural institutions, as well as other potentially more tenuous relationships, but sponsorship, which has become such a high profile discussion topic recently. So thinking about relationships with services, with suppliers, who your organization might be working with for their banking, for their energy supply, and where they're receiving money from through things like sponsorships and other partnership working, all has major implications on the environment and environmental sustainability. UNEP has estimated that around 29% of global commercial fish populations are overfished, while 61% are in fact fully fished, which means if fishing increases, it would become totally unsustainable. So again, this is where we can make a connection between the broader context and how we can challenge that and think differently within the decisions we make around cultural management, which could include conversations around procurement and particularly around food. Art and noise pollution from construction and capital development projects or cultural events, particularly ones that happen in either cities or in green spaces. All this kind of pollution, as well as, of course, chemical pollution, um, leaching of fuels into water supply or into soil would cause major issues for any local wildlife or biodiversity. So obviously this can be tackled through good management of anything that's causing pollution on site, and should be part of any event infrastructure and event management processes, in order to reduce the possibility of those impacts. And I'm going to come back to this point around disconnection from nature. So it's really important here, I think, to say that we can't protect what we don't value or understand. And this is a really exciting opportunity for arts, culture, and heritage management to use their programming, to use their engagement activities, to work with audiences, local citizens, to really help people understand and appreciate green spaces, and how green spaces might be used at venues or at cultural sites, how buildings could be framed as part of a natural environment rather than being opposed to it. So there's a lot of opportunity here to really bring those personal connections. And I think this is really nicely described through looking at language, which is an essential component of culture and cultural heritage. But some languages are losing their words relating to the natural world, exacerbating this rift between humans and other species. The philosopher A.J. Ayer introduced a generation to the notion that unless we have a word for something, we are unable to conceive of it, and that there is a direct relationship between our imagination, our ability to have ideas about things, and our vocabulary. And this is really important in a time when we're losing words to describe nature. So something that's been discussed a lot by the wonderful Robert Macfarlane is that in 2007, the new edition of Oxford Junior Dictionary introduced new words such as broadband, whilst losing others such as acorn, blackberry, bluebell, conker. However, there are some other interesting developments happening in terms of language. So, for example, the Australian philosopher Glenn Albrecht, who has suggested that we need a new vocabulary to accurately capture our emotional relationship to nature and place. And obviously, he's referring to the English language because all indigenous languages, of course, have that far greater connection to locality, to nature, in a far more developed and nuanced way than the English language does. But what he's looking at is what words can be introduced. So he came up with a concept called solastalgia, which comes from nostalgia and is all about the homesickness you feel when you're still at home, and could be used in the sense of emotional loss experienced from things like droughts and sudden hurricanes or floods or pollution change to our homes. So that's a really interesting piece of research that I encourage you to have a look at. It's very interesting. So what would be the benefits of engaging with biodiversity and habitat protection? Well, I feel it's sort of stating the obvious. everyone feels better when you're in cleaner, greener, nicer, less polluted spaces that we all want to live in. There's, of course, a major social justice angle here, that often those places that are most socially and economically deprived often bear the brunt of more environmental hazards and more environmental pollution. So a very important social justice issue. Further benefits are, of course, improved health, plants helping to reduce air pollution, and also really critically, mental health benefits. There's more and more research demonstrating the positive effects on mental health, spending time in green spaces. And forest bathing is a really nice example of that as a practice, spending time in forests. So, bringing nature firmly back into our understanding of culture and heritage has never been more important, building on that long tradition of this intersection of arts and nature, and how that is addressing once and some of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time, such as climate change and biodiversity collapse, which are both interconnected. And we're also supported by international frameworks. So we've got the lovely Sustainable Development Goals, which include SDG 14, Life Below Water, and SDG 15, Life on Land. And what's really important about this framework is that although they're perhaps based on the design, there's a tendency to see these in isolation, the SDG framework is firmly built on the philosophy that all these SDGs are interconnected, and to be able to tackle one is to tackle all of them. So what could be the challenges in cultural heritage professionals engaging with the topic of biodiversity? So I've listed a few examples here that could be posing barriers in order to create more capacity around biodiversity management. A number of barriers have been cited in cultural heritage literature. Things like institutional barriers that could be around politics and policy commitments, technical barriers, which is around knowledge and expertise, and financial barriers, the resources that are available to support professionals in engaging with environment and biodiversity. But let's move on to some good practice case studies. So thinking about where it's working. So this is a really great example from Guimarães in Portugal, which has developed a strategic plan which protects and promotes biodiversity in urban areas. The plan emphasises the importance of indigenous species and their added value. The main objective is to educate citizens and local stakeholders through leadership and advocacy. Can I just check that people are able to see the slides? I think there's been a couple of small issues with a couple of attendees being able to see what's on the page. Okay, so unfortunately it says the slide. So the slides are not coming available. Okay, that's obviously not ideal. If you just bear with me 1 second. Oh, At least the audio is working. Okay, so now you can probably see the slides. So what I'm going to do is send around the slides following the webinar. I don't think you've missed anything hugely essential on the visuals so far, but you'll be able to catch up when I circulate them afterwards. So thank you very much though for bearing with us, and apologies that wasn't picked up sooner, but at least we're in time to see the case studies, which would be a terrible shame for you not to see those. Okay. So back to Portugal. So this strategic plan included actions such as biodiversity routes, which were created for enjoying the biodiversity of the region, promoting natural heritage involving the school community. The local ornithological observation centre was created with the purpose of educating and raising awareness of the community to the importance of protecting biodiversity. And also improvement of nature tourism. So looking at potential areas to become more attractive for locals and tourists. Fostering the number of sports events, for example, and new activities that then led to the creation of new jobs and new projects. So a major emphasis was promoting touristic nature-related activities that connected with biological diversity and their cultural programming. A lot of this work was based in 2014 when an initial environmental assessment of the city allowed them to develop and define a programme to engage and raise awareness among citizens. So this is really important, I think, in across all kinds of projects, is that you always start from a position of scoping and understanding the local context before developing any initiatives. They also very much focused on how this approach could be integrated, looking at a very horizontal approach to combining physical, economic, social and environmental dimensions, and how those four areas could be mutually reinforcing. It was also a very participatory approach, promoting public and private interactions, recognizing the importance of citizens and citizen science concepts, and community engagement and empowerment. Another great example is what's been happening in Hamburg, Germany. Hamburg is growing and there is a strong demand for new housing, which puts pressure on the city's open green spaces. And green roofs have become a first step in addressing this problem. So the basic goal of the Green Roof Strategy is to encourage the building of 100 additional hectares of green roofs in 1 decade. And this strategy is based on 4 key elements, which can be made responsible for the success that's been seen so far. And those 4 elements are communication and dialogue, funding, regulation, and scientific support. So research by the Hafen City University shows that a green roof in Hamburg can be about 30 degrees cooler than a conventional roof on a hot summer's day. So researchers have also calculated that the higher costs for building green roofs would be in fact offset within 20 years, presenting a financial incentive in the long run. And overall, the city provides a lot of the professional guidance for people interested in greening their roofs from the planning stage and calculating the amount of potential funding to the actual implementation and decisions on what plants to use. And I think another reason for the success of the strategy has been the extensive planning involved in creating the strategy itself. So the city started by considering the overall picture and included stakeholders, made certain it had the necessary resources and commitments from local governments, and the people that were really essential in getting buy-in. Another lovely example from Portugal at the it was probably a difficult time for Lisbon at the end of the 20th century. It was suffering economically and had lost a third of its population. But in 2007, the political landscape changed and there was a desire to do things really differently. During this time, Lisbon's Green Infrastructure Programme was born. Above all, as a result of political will. Increasingly, hot and dry summers posed a major threat to the citizens' daily fresh water supply, while wet summers and wet autumns, and winters brought flooding, more frequent flooding. So the city really wanted to address its vulnerability to heat waves, water scarcity, flash flooding, all results or all exacerbated by climate change, and think about integrating these challenges into its resilience planning. So building on this political momentum, Lisbon developed the Green Infrastructure Programme, integrating it into the city's master plan and connecting it to the Biodiversity Action Plan. And this is, I think, so important is that these strategies, again, are not seen in isolation, but on the city level, they are interconnected, they speak to each other, and they are mutually reinforcing rather than contradictory. The programme takes as its lead objective the ambitious target of a 20% increase in green areas by 2020. And so far, a 10% increase has been achieved and is structured around 9 green corridors. The first of these was finished in 2012, which connected the main park of the city with the forest park on the outskirts. And since then, a further 5 have been opened. And I think this is such a nice initiative because green corridors are so incredibly important. They help address a variety of environmental challenges. In an effort to provide extra shade and cooling on hot days, 80,000 trees will be added to Lisbon's green corridors by 2021 to prevent flash floods. Rainwater retention areas are also being created in the city, and the first one is being scheduled for completion in 2019. In addition, Lisbon is making use of biodiversity meadows, which are irrigated with rainwater and designed to replace standard lawns. They have the added benefit of increasing biodiversity, as well as soil quality, and also the storage of carbon dioxide and nitrogen. So again, another mitigation measure for climate change. And this has huge opportunity for being replicated across southern European cities. And they cite that a crucial success factor for their initiative was, again, getting citizens on board. So as the city's approach was seen as quite unusual, they needed to understand why the city was choosing these actions and what being green actually means in practice, especially as it sometimes results in having brown grass. So this was done through a lot of educational materials, workshops, videos, campaigns, and interactive events such as joint tree planting that was hosted on Saturdays. So this has been a really popular greening measure in the city. Lisbon has an urban allotment gardens programme as well, which with 650 plots spread over 20 parks. When different forms of adaptation come together, for example, the meadows and the urban allotments, the local parks, people really strongly support it, and then this can lead to faster implementation of new initiatives. By the end of hopefully early 2019, which is perhaps now, the city is also starting with the second phase of the programme, which will be potentially more challenging because densely populated areas will be affected. Pavements will be broken up and other forms of great infrastructure will have to be demolished. This has, of course, the potential to lead to conflict, conflict of private interests, and will require very careful implementation. However, the success is already visible with over 200 new hectares of green space created, which is halfway to the target of 2020 when all the 9 corridors will be completed. And this is a nice report that I wanted to reference. The core of the project is national competitions, which put local action for biodiversity at the centre of attention. So which municipalities act with the most commitment for biodiversity? Are they creating and supporting natural green spaces, initiating river revitalization projects? And these competitions were first implemented in France, Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, and Spain in 2010. Altogether, 521 municipalities have participated in the competitions, which represents over 40 million Europeans. Another really useful resource, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2020. And I think what's really important here is that it establishes the need for local actions contributing to averting biodiversity loss. So this represents sort of international framework within which to be, which then needs to feed into or cascade to local policy. I also wanted to mention this particular initiative because it's in my my home city and also is very soon upon us, which is the London National Park City. So the current London Mayor Sadiq Khan is helping to make London the world's first national park city. One of their aims is to make more than half the city's area green, and the mayor is working with the National Park City Foundation and other partners and Londoners to achieve this ambition. So it will offer all kinds of opportunities to experience the great outdoors within London, and will be promoting a huge array of events and engagement activities for local people to get involved with, like growing, like gardening, green roofs, green walls, which of course will also support London's ambitions around climate change and its resilience. Another area I wanted to refer to was things around capital development. So really important to think about if you are in the process of any developments to buildings, how biodiversity can be implemented from the very beginning. So looking at if any areas have special status or designated protection areas for wildlife, using ecological surveys to identify positive opportunities to support biodiversity, connecting with local partners who are encouraging biodiversity in your city, which may present opportunities to connect to wildlife corridors or urban wilding initiatives or new sanctuaries for at-risk species, etc. Always look at opportunities for creating new spaces for wildlife, which of course are also have the tendency to be enjoyed by people as well. Things like bird and bat boxes, beehives, wood piles for invertebrates, as well as green infrastructure like new trees, planters, living walls, roofs, new parkland. You can also think about bringing spaces, green spaces and plants into offices and buildings. Plants are commonly used for local air filtration that supports physical and mental well-being of your building occupiers. And if you're actually looking at the design, the architecture of a new building or a new capital project, investigate concepts of biomimicry into architectural briefs for the capital development project. So how can the design be inspired by principles and practices of nature itself, which could also include more practical implementation like rainwater harvesting, sustainable urban drainage systems, which have become really important in cities. So green infrastructure takes a wide range of scales, from a green roof to an open space or parkland. As we've already said, it has a wide range of benefits, especially in cities, cooling the air and reducing urban heat island effect, filtering urban pollutants, increasing biodiversity, and improving physical and mental health. So there is plenty of expertise and information out there that can help you choose appropriate plants for the conditions within which they're going to be planted and the kind of ecosystem services that they offer. There are particular species that are, for example, really great at filtering certain pollutants out the air. One thing probably to note is that green infrastructure can be expensive, including not just the upfront investment, but also the ongoing cost of maintenance. And I think the aspect of maintenance, particularly when it applies to things like green roofs and green walls, it has become something of a barrier. So ensure that maintenance costs are included in project briefs and budgets. This is another example here from London, looking at a cultural venue, Village Underground, a music venue in East London. Installed a green roof to help dampen concert noise. Instead of opting for a concrete roof, they went for a green roof. And when wet, soil can provide sufficient sound insulation. So today, the green roof continues to provide a habitat for a range of insects and plants. It includes a beehive and a pollinator-friendly vegetation like lavender. And it also stands out as an oasis of greenery in an increasingly developed neighbourhood, which is enjoyed by staff and tenants. Looking at outdoor events. So considering what an event, if you're hosting a festival in your city centre, or even surrounding your city centre, you can consider how that your event site is a year-round habitat for plants and animals. So what can be done to limit any negative impact, and how might your event even encourage positive impact? So the first thing that you can do, particularly if you're in a green space, is undertake an ecological survey or environmental impact assessment to identify any protected or sensitive species that may impact your site planning. That can include pointing lights and sound away from bird or bat nesting sites, or creating exclusion zones around fragile trees or vegetation. There is also many legal requirements for avoiding pollution, such as fuel or sewage spillages, and ensuring you provide enough toilets to prevent ammonia running off into waterways in case crowds urinate where they shouldn't. A nice example here of a positive contribution is a festival in Australia, which was developed a koala management plan that was approved by the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment. So the festival worked with wildlife researchers at the University of Queensland to do year-round surveys of the koala population around the festival site, and to try and put measures in place to protect them, including giving antibiotics to sick koalas, planting trees to improve their habitat, and eliminating wild dogs, which is one of the leading causes of koala death. opportunities of programming and the inspirational element, which comes back to, again, why arts and culture can really bring something to the space of environment and biodiversity. So thinking about how you can foster deeper connection with nature through programming. Through your programming, you can bring people into green spaces or into proximity with nature, drive the regeneration and restoration of natural sites through art projects, highlight extinction threats, help people work through their emotions connected with the disappearance of habitats and biodiversity, and celebrate green spaces to help people connect to them through all manner of activities, performances in parks, community gardening, food growing initiatives, wildlife walks. All of these help improve our understanding of nature, and create opportunities for forging new relationships with audiences, but also partnerships with perhaps local bodies such as research institutions, local environmental organisations, local citizen groups. So something that kind of transcends the built environment and also events are things coming back to what I started mentioning before around procurement. So procurement offers a major opportunity to shape how biodiversity is impacted by human consumption. So you can place a procurement policy that seeks to avoid driving deforestation, looking, for example, at Rainforest Alliance certified products, sustainably certified palm oil, putting in place a procurement policy that avoids overexploitation of threatened species, like the Marine Conservation Society Good Fish Guide, and avoid sourcing any fish that is below a good choice rating. Thinking about biofuels, so fuels that are derived from waste sources from within the EU, and choosing those over biofuels that are derived from palm oil feedstocks, which often don't have the same accountability and can be responsible for unsustainable deforestation. You could also look at things like vegetarian and vegan catering. Animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to deforestation, from both the land needed for grazing animals and the land needed to grow livestock feed. Including more vegetarian and vegan catering options, again, is going to be contributing to biodiversity management on a far larger global scale. Plastics is another great example, very topical at the moment. Global plastic production, looking at the waste hierarchy, of course, recycling is in there and recycling is great, but as first priority, we always think of avoid, reduce, and reuse before recycling. So a number of festivals have put bans on different plastics. A number of cities have, countries are preparing to have outright bans on certain plastic products, like plastic straws, like plastic bags. Recycling is great, but as I say, we're looking at what can actually be removed out of the supply chain, what is not required, how can we think completely differently about how we're consuming. And I thought I would just finish there on another lovely couple of initiatives which are really doing very well in media and public engagement, which is around beehives and protecting bees and offering more habitats and places for bees to thrive. So that is the presentation. Apologize again that you weren't able to see the initial slides, and I will be able to circulate those once we have concluded today's webinar. I'm now delighted to be joined by our guest speaker, Moya Lloyd from Project, and I'm just going to hopefully connect with Moya now.
Hello?
Hello, Moya. We can hear
Hi,
you.
Lucy. That's good.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I've got a copy of Moya's slides, so she's going to speak and I'm going to move through them.
Okay, thank you for inviting me today, Lucy. Can we start by moving on to the first slide, please? Thank you. So yeah, just to say who I am, I'm a freelance creative producer and I'm managing a project called the Boundary Way Project, and we're in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands. We are a collective of artists and allotment holders based at Boundary Way Allotments and Community Gardens. So the first slide is a map of our site, which was designed as part of a Heritage Lottery funded project that we started on in 2016. We're just to say about our location, particularly, we're on the boundary between the urban environment and the city of Wolverhampton, and the rural landscape of South Staffordshire and looking across to Shropshire. Can I move on to the next slide? So there's some photographs here which give you a little bit more of an idea of our site. So we, as well as being a community allotment, we have a community garden that was developed around the year 2000, and you can see here we have a storytelling space, we've got a woodland area, we've got an orchard, we've got a very large polytunnel, which I'll be showing some slides of in a moment, which doubles up as a growing space. But also an education space, and the Boundary Way project. The aims are to support the development of the community garden as a resource for local people. So if we can move on to the next slide. So through a series of funding, we've developed different arts and cultural and heritage initiatives to encourage people to use our site, to make links with local schools, but also to get artists to engage with the landscape and the local environment. So we've got a couple of photographs there which show both the kind of rural and urban aspects of our site. If we can move on to the next one, please. So in 2016, we were awarded some money from Heritage Lottery, and the aim of that project was to look in more detail at the heritage of our site, both in terms of the natural heritage, but also looking at the social history. And one of the big parts of that work was starting to look at the plants that we had growing in our community garden. So here is local herbalist Maria Billington, who worked with us to research the plants over the seasons, which she did in conjunction with local school children, and also plot holders and people that use our site. And she led a whole programme of educational activities where she got children to think about connections in nature. She got us all foraging, taught us a lot about what we could eat from the plants that we found, and also looked at the medicinal uses. So she actually found every plant that we found, she showed us that it could be useful, even getting some of the plot holders to revalue what they saw as weeds on their plot and look at how they can be used. So if I can move on to the next slide. So here's one of Maria's sessions. She's actually making some carrot hand cream, very useful for when you've been doing a lot of gardening with a group of pot holders and users of our site. So another thing that that we were doing as part of the project is gathering a resource and getting resources online so that they can be used by schools, so that schools can use the site themselves. So as a result of Maria's findings, we put together a series of seasonal worksheets which can now be downloaded from our website and used for the site visits. If I can move on to the next one. So alongside our heritage research, we had a series of artist commissions and residencies as well, and these pictures show one of those which happened in October 2017. We invited artists to respond to our site, and particularly we were looking for artists that would use the natural resources that we have available. So, so these images were work created by Richard Schilling and Julia Brooklyn, who are land artists based in Lancashire. They spent 2 weeks working on our site and experiencing the landscape and making work with natural materials. They also engaged with a variety of community groups. So the mandala image that you can see on the right hand side was created in a collective workshop with a group of people where everyone could participate and put together materials that they gathered in the landscape. They also worked with school pupils of all ages, from quite young that you can see in the left-hand picture to sixth formers, and helped to introduce teachers to natural resources and ways of working which can help them to engage with our garden as well. If we can move on to the next slide, which shows some more images from workshops that Richard and Julia led. This is with a sixth form group, and also members of the public who attended on an open day and had a go at techniques of weaving, binding and threading with natural materials. If I can go on to the next one. So we looked creatively at how we could work in different ways that use the resources that we've got, and this was a local textile artist, Sue Chand, who did some made dyes with plants and demonstrated to a group of other artists how to use this technique and make materials that can be later pieces. If we can move on to the next one. And another local artist, Hannah Boyd, came up with the idea of using found materials to make tools which could then be used for mark making and creative expression through using ink on paper. So all with found objects. If we can move on to the next one. And another artist, Rebecca Green, this is one of her workshops using encaustic techniques, which was another method that we found of using natural materials. So it's basically a technique that we've used to embed found materials in wax to create structures and decorative pieces. If we can move on to the next one. And later on, we we brought the results of our workshops and artist responses together in a series of exhibitions, which we called a sense of place, and this is a sense of place exhibition that took place in October last year, and actually was part of Julie's Bicycle Season for Change programme, which was a national initiative linking projects that were raising awareness around climate change using culture and the arts. The work exhibited very much reflects the particular qualities of our site, and you can see in the right hand photograph there's a quote from one of our plot holders about the kind of therapeutic effects of visiting Boundary Way and growing vegetables and having a plot. Which was something that was echoed with many of the people that we talked to as part of our heritage research. If I can move on again, please. And these are some more images. So artists worked in a range of ways, using collage, using photography, found materials, and we had a series of sessions where artists worked in the landscape, sketching, gathering materials, and responding and using found materials in many different ways as well. So the opportunity of linking in with Season for Change linked us in with a national network which helped to profile our work, and the artist work, which was funded as well as through Heritage Lottery, through the Arts Council, gave us an opportunity to invite artists to think about their practice and ways of working and how they can be more sustainable in their choice of materials and working methods as well, which is something that we're thinking about in an ongoing way. Because of the nature of our site, because we're outdoors, we don't have a building, we don't have electricity, that's brought some challenges, but also helped us to think in a way that connects us more with the environment and using the resources that we have. If I can go on to the next one. And these images here show the outcome of some educational work with a local special school for children with learning difficulties. Again, we worked creatively with them, with a number of different artists, inviting them to come and spend time in our garden and respond. We used iPad photography, collage, actually taking rubbings, experiencing the texture of leaves and wood grain, and then bringing that together to make some artistic pieces which are exhibited here. And the exhibition is obviously within our site as well in the polytunnel. We also found that the multi-sensory exploration of our site was something that young people really benefited from. So we encourage them to listen to the sounds of nature, to experience the tactile qualities of natural objects, leaves, plants, the earth, which teachers felt was a great benefit for them to experience outdoor learning and to build their confidence in coming into a setting that was outside of their classroom. If we can go on to the next one. And this brings us to some more recent work which has happened over the last couple of months. Again, this is looking at another aspect of biodiversity, and we hosted an exhibition called The Beyondness of Bees with two artists called Sue Briscoe and Elise Stewart. The concept of this exhibition was to look at bees in a great detail using microscopes and and Sue has a science background, so she showed participants microscopic images of bees and prepared a set of slides so that each participant in the workshop could really study close up and look at the bee forms and learn about bees through a talk. They then took part in drawing, and this was later followed up with creating textile pieces based on the drawings that they'd created. So it's a chance for a real in-depth study of nature and bringing together artistic responses as well. So we hosted both a workshop and an exhibition of the outcomes of workshops as well. If I can move on to the next one, please. And this takes us up to a recent project which has evolved from our continuing investigation of our site and what we've found there. And we've recently been awarded funding through Grow Wild, which is a National Lottery community funded project, which is administered through Kew Gardens. And the aim of it is to promote both wildflowers and fungi. Our project is called Magnifying Mushrooms, and it looks at fungi. It's enabled us to continue our arts and science collaboration by bringing together expertise in mycology with various creative techniques as well. So these photographs were taken yesterday when we had a visiting mycologist give us an introduction to fungi, and you can see him here showing us some examples of fungi on our site. And this is a starting point for a whole programme of fungi related activities, which is starting in June, and members of the public can come and take part in creative sessions including drawing, painting, experimental textiles, and learn about fungi folklore. And we'll also be hosting an exhibition in September of the outcome of these workshops alongside an education programme with local schools. So if I go on to the final slide, which again shows our Magnifying Mushrooms workshop. So we're actually going back to the mapping that we were doing earlier with plants. We're now investigating fungi on site. We're finding different species, we're photographing them, and the image in the middle at the top is by an artist called Kanj Nicholas, who has been spending time on the site and portraying the mushrooms through her painting style with vibrant colour and rich detail. And this has actually turned into an online social media campaign, which was made possible again through Grow Wild funding for a youth project, which is led by one of our colleagues, Holly Playdale. And in recent weeks, she's been presenting facts about mushrooms alongside beautiful artworks to make people think about the importance and the fascination of fungi. So that's kind of really the start of what's going to be a very exciting area of work, which we're going to be continuing over the next few months. So further information about our project is on our website, and I've put our social media profile details there where there's further information. So that's the end of my slide presentation.
Thank you so much, Moira. That was absolutely brilliant. It's a beautiful project. I've been very lucky to visit the site myself, Boundary Way, and it is absolutely fantastic. If you are ever visiting the area, I definitely encourage you to have a look. So we are now going to just have a bit of time for any questions that people for my myself. We will do our best to answer them. I'll kick off with one question that I have for you, Moya, is around what you think the legacy for these initiatives. I think sometimes the challenge of project funding is that it's obviously for a specific period of time, and then sometimes things, kind of are produced and then they kind of die after the funding is finished. So what have you done to try and kind of continue that legacy of this amazing work that you've been doing?
I think the legacy in our case is that we've managed to build take time to build relationships with local people and community partners. I mean, but both kind of plot holders and local organisations are always in a kind of transient stage. Things don't stay the same, but by, I suppose, gradually evolving our project and trying to keep in touch with the allotment committee, liaise with local schools, we've tried to kind of build in that ongoing relationships and continuity, and also to keep kind of making sure that what we're doing is not just what we want to do, but is something that everybody's going to benefit from. And I mentioned earlier on about the resources that we've been able to create through the project. So I suppose by having those there and creating our profile through a website and social media profiles, we're letting people know about what we're doing so that they can access it. And with the educational resources, it's something that teachers can use in the classroom as well. So but yeah, that's one way. I think we've been also done a lot of research to find out funding that's relevant to what we want to do, and it turned out that the Grow Wild funding that we've recently got was a kind of natural link from what we'd already established with our heritage research to be able to focus on another aspect of biodiversity on our site.
Excellent. And you've been doing some nice social media and you've created a video, is that right?
Yes, yeah, an important part of our heritage project was we made a film about our site, which is available to view on our website, which was created by filmmaker and artist Jeff Broadway, and that contains a number of interviews with plot holders, past and present, combined with capturing our landscape and the artistic and cultural activities that have been taking place between 2016 and 2018. So obviously that is a really important part of the legacy of our project. We also have a brochure which is on our website, which again collates many of the things that I've been talking about today, so people can see that on our website as well, which is richly illustrated with lots of photography too.
Great. Yeah, it looks fantastic. This is a project really that has achieved so much and has engaged with so many diverse people in this community. So I'm just going to check that we don't have any questions, which is absolutely great. You've all been exceptionally patient staying online despite our technical issue before. So if there is any questions that you'd like to follow up with, please feel free to email into Julie's Bicycle at info@juliesbicycle.com, and we will do our best to address them. And we look forward to welcoming you on another webinar soon. And following this, I will circulate the presentation so that you can follow up on any of the links or any of the in the slides. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you again soon.